Hello and welcome. I recently had my credit card info stolen and it got me thinking about the 2A and e-commerce space because I don't know if you know this, the 2A is definitely the black sheep of the e-commerce world and there are severe implications of that. So in this video, I want to talk about the current state of e-commerce and the 2A, the implications of that to you and I, as well as some steps that I have taken that perhaps can give you some ideas on how to protect yourself. And in the end, I will share the absolute worst example I have ever seen of how this culminates and how a real world business is doing e-commerce today. And no, YouTube, this is not sponsored. This is not directing anyone to go anywhere to buy anything. It is just a discussion from the perspective of a consumer that operates within this space. Starting with the current landscape, the 2A space is the notable exception to the trend of conglomeration that we saw take place pretty much everywhere else. Of course, you have your major players like Brownells, PSA, Midway, Primary Arms, and of course Gunbroker. And of course, you have your traditional actual retailers such as Academy and Cabela's and Shields and Bass Pro, etc. But you also have a ton of smaller independent entities that still manage to operate perfectly legitimate businesses such as Aim Surplus, Atlantic Firearms, Centerfire Systems, RTG, Apex, Armors of America, etc. That type of fragmentation just did not survive in other spaces within e-commerce, and that's not a coincidence. The larger platforms, obviously like Amazon, eBay, Etsy, Shopify, they want very, very little to do with firearms. At best, they're willing to tolerate FUD hunting accessories, but anything fun, interesting, or tactically valuable, or God forbid, actual firearms, they are actively hostile against. And then there's payment processing. There's a reason you can't just use PayPal or Google Pay or any of the other options on literally any website that sells gun-related anything. They really, really do not like it, and they will shut you down so fast if you try to do that. So the result is they have to stick to more and more niche, smaller credit card processors, which in and of itself, there's not a whole lot of options, and so they get tacked on with larger fees on top of the normal, 1.5% to 3% that people get charged for processing credit cards anywhere. So it becomes more and more expensive for them to operate. And this is all a very deliberate policy choice. These mainly West Coast big monolithic corporations are very purposefully trying to strangle anything that they personally dislike. And all of this isn't even talking about peer-to-peer transactions that are perfectly legal. So say you buy or even sell something on Gunbroker. How do you deal with payment? Well, you can't use PayPal without violating their terms of service. And so you either risk it and try to get strangers on the internet to have an ounce of self-awareness and not just put payment for AR-15 in the description, which will get both of your PayPal accounts nuked, or you fall back to ever more sketchy, weird sell cash app options in which people get scammed every single day, or you have to use a money order, in which case you're still not guaranteed to not get scammed. There's no good solution for modern, secure financial transacting within this space between peers today. All of these different factors come together to create a very fragmented industry, which, to be fair, it has its pros and cons. It is more resilient to political attacks because there's not a single entity that can be taken down that would just cripple the entire industry. However, key characteristics of capitalism are undermined because services and platforms that have become industry standard actively choose to turn away customers because they don't like the business they're doing, even though it's perfectly legitimate business. And the market that is ostracized is not big enough to compete at the same scale against these players that have become monopolies. So anyone who wants to start a small business manufacturing firearms parts or guns, or even just reselling things, or even just opening an online portal to a real life gun store, they must navigate not only all the same hurdles that every other e-commerce retailer has to, but also a minefield of ever-changing policies by these behemoth corporations. The result is a total mixed bag of what you'll run across as a consumer, from the custom website built by the owner's cousin's kid to open source solutions that are variously maintained to people having good luck on legitimate actual e-commerce platforms, although not the bigger players, some smaller ones, to people who have enough of a presence that they have their own dedicated IT staff. But this variance means that some websites are totally fine and some are perfectly legitimate but horrifying. So as a consumer operating in this space, you just have to accept that there are going to be security risks more than normal, and you're going to have to perhaps take some measures to protect yourself, because somebody along the way, if you operate in this space long enough, is going to leak your info. So let's talk about what we can do to protect ourselves. So first off, don't use a debit card. Honestly, you really shouldn't be using a debit card and putting it into random websites anyway, especially ones that haven't been updated since 2005. But if you insist upon paying things out of your checking account, then use a service like privacy.com in order to generate a one-time use, temporary virtual card that you can use, and just do that every time you place an order. But otherwise, if you have a physical card in your hand that you are typing the info into a website, it should be a credit card, because that does give you an extra layer of security, because technically it's not your money that you're spending, it's the bank's. You just pay the bank back later. Next, if you're going to operate in the space, you should probably embrace online banking and just financial awareness in general. You should know where your money's going. And if you see, oh, that wasn't me, that transaction, that's not me, like that should be a red flag that you should catch pretty quick. It's way better than waiting an entire month to get a statement and be like, what are all these transactions that are not me? Like, because you had no idea that that activity was occurring on your line of credit. Next, I do personally segment my credit cards. I have one that I use exclusively for gun stuff, and then I have the other one that I use for everything else, especially like auto pay stuff. Because when the gun card gets stolen, it's easier to just cancel that, get a new number, dispute the fraudulent charges, whatever, and then everything else stays the same. Like, there's no worry about having to redo auto pay on everything, and it's just easier. It's also part of the reason that I have a good idea of at least the short list of who leaked my info, because I only spent a couple of transactions in between different times that my info was leaked. And partially because of that experience, and because I do have it segmented, I have taken to just locking that card until I'm actually ready to buy something. So because I'm the only one that uses that card, because I'm the only one buying gun stuff, and it's exclusively for that purpose, I just leave it locked all the time. So even if somebody does have the info, they can't use it because it's locked, and I can just open the online portal, click unlock, check out at wherever it is I'm buying something, and then go back and lock the card again. And it's a lot safer and easier to do that than it is to just leave it unlocked. Obviously that doesn't work if you're buying a ton of stuff or if you have multiple people using the same card. But again, if it's exclusively for this and you're like me and you only buy a couple things a month, it's worth it, and it's been much more useful to do that. Although some places do payment processing weird, and that causes problems. Which brings us to some real world examples. So I'm gonna talk about Century Arms. I'm not pointing fingers at them or saying they're doing anything wrong, but they do things weird, and unfortunately I have direct experience with them, and their process is just strange. So you submit an order like normal, you put in your card info, and it puts a temporary charge on your card, validating it. And then you get an email that says that your shipping notification, that your order has shipped, will be when your credit card is charged. However, that happens like a week later. So in my case, I unlocked my card when I submitted the order. They got enough info to put a temporary charge on my card, so I figured it was good, locked it back. Then a week later, they sent me an email being like, hey, we can't charge your card. And it's like, yeah, because it's locked, because you guys already did this. And so I had to unlock it, and then they charged it, and then, a couple hours later, I was able to lock it back again. But the implication is that they're basically just capturing credit card info, right? Like, they're not handling the processing at the time of purchase, which means I don't know how that info is stored. It's just they're capturing it somehow such that they can fully reconstitute it and then submit a totally separate payment at a later date. All right, that's fine. It's just definitely a non-standard way of doing business. So it's one of those instances that, my strategy for, just locking and unlocking the card doesn't really apply very well to them, which kind of sucks. And I have no idea what their data looks like behind the scenes, and I'm a little bit afraid to ask. So again, not saying they're doing anything nefarious or pointing fingers, but just a little weird, and a good example of the type of things that go on. However, it is not the worst offender. That prestigious award goes to, drumroll, Empire Arms. Holy good God, look at this website. So this man is doing legitimate business in 2024, and this is his website. So amongst the 1990s and the other FUD nonsense, such as not selling any assault rifles, you can get to this absolute gem. Get instructions on how to safely email your credit card information to us, which is you just gotta click on that, because wow. So following that takes us to this glorious set of instructions. So basically you take half your credit card number and your expiration date and you email it to this email address, and then you take the other half of your credit card number and the CVV and you email it to this email address that only he has access to. That way it's totally secure. Why doesn't Amazon do this? Honestly, I mean, for sure, like, this is the way to do credit card transactions in 2024. Like, this is it. There's really no need for all the rest of it. You can also include a note, and he will add your credit card info to presumably his spreadsheet, where he will then go access it next time that you place an order with him and just use the same info again, because this is a perfectly legitimate way of doing business apparently in 2024. So yeah, that is the worst offender that I've ever seen, and somehow this is, I won't say it's acceptable, but it is a way to do things that exists within this space that's kind of mind-blowing. Because while I don't think that if PayPal weren't anti-gun that this would just magically be fixed and would be 100% up to snuff with everything else, I do believe that the institutionalization of the anti-gun policies that we have seen over the past, basically since the beginning of the internet, has resulted in examples like this, where this is just unsecure for everyone involved. Like, this is just a problem. Either way, you, the consumer, you have to do everything that you can to protect yourself, because no one cares about your financial interest more than you do. Hopefully this was insightful or interesting, or at least entertaining. If you work in this industry, or if I'm way off base here, or you've seen behind the curtain, do let me know below. I'd love to hear it. I know enough to be scared, but I don't work directly in this same space, but it's a little bit horrifying what I do have to run across, and sometimes I have to sort of hold my nose and go for it. I have to assume the risk and do everything I can to mitigate the risk to myself, but I do have to assume the risk. Yeah, this was something that I just needed to get out of my mind, because it sometimes is a little bit maddening what you have to deal with. So thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.